I love making things on the scroll saw, and today I'm going to show you how to transform this pattern into this beautiful display. I made it from 1/4-inch Baltic birch plywood, and since I'm making these to sell, I made 3 at a time by stack cutting them. This is not an easy pattern, but I'll pass along some cutting tips that will teach you how to make this great display piece for your home, to give as a gift, or to sell like I do. Let's get started. It doesn't matter what order you cut the layers in, and I decided to start with the easiest, the backer. This is not an easy pattern to cut, but it certainly is less complex than the pumpkin that will be mounted on top of the backer, and easier than the top layer on which the words Happy Thanksgiving will be cut. I'm using a number 7 Pegas Modified Geometry blade for this cut. This pattern is simple enough that I could probably use a number 9 blade, but cutting would go faster, but that number 9 would likely make it difficult to complete the extremely tight turns that will be needed in the other 2 layers. I want to ensure that number 7 can cut these 3 layers of plywood without bogging down. If so, then I know it'll be a good choice for the other 2 layers. There are a lot of curves on this pattern, but there are also a few places that have sharp 90-degree corners. In my opinion, these turns place the most stress on the blade. Almost as if on cue, the blade got caught in a tight spot, and that put enough stress on the blade that the tension switch on the top of the arm popped open. When I checked, I found the blade had been pulled out of the lower blade holder, and it hadn't broken. The blade was so tightly jammed in the stack of plywood layers I couldn't pull it out by hand. I had to resort to a pair of pliers to do that. I wasn't sure if the blade was damaged or not, but since blades are inexpensive, I decided to err on the side of caution and toss it. I made a quick cut to make it easy to remove the large waste area that had been created so far. The cutting line was ragged until I reached a 90-degree corner. This gives me a perfect opportunity to explain how I make these corners. I cut to the point where the cutting line changes direction, and then I backed up slightly, just enough so the blade was no longer cutting. Then I used the curve just created, along with the waste area, for the blade to cut while I rotated the workpiece 90 degrees. Once the wood was aligned to the new direction I wanted to cut, I applied pressure to the workpiece again and started cutting. I finished cutting, and because I stack cut 3 layers of Baltic birch plywood, I now have 3 of this layer completed in the time it would have taken me to cut 1. The middle layer has nothing left to do, so I can just set it aside. The top and bottom layers have blue painter's tape on them, but that peels off easily. All but 1 or 2 rows utilize the wide tape, so peeling it off won't take long. It's time to move on to the middle layer, which represents a pumpkin shape with several accent marks to add depth and interest. I'm going to stay with the number 7 blade, as I know for certain it can handle the 3/4 thickness of the 3 layers of plywood. There are a few tight turns to be made on some of the interior cuts for this layer, but I think that with a few tricks I've learned over the years, these can be made with a number 7 blade. I zoomed in to show this cut at 2 times magnification so you can see the detail better. This shape features 2 long parallel curves with squared corners at each end. I'll show you a little trick I've learned over the years to make this cut as easy as possible. From the pilot hole, I cut along one line until I reached the corner, stopped, then backed up to the pilot hole. Then I cut along the curved line parallel to the first, made a 90-degree corner, cut the short straight line, and then made the second 90-degree corner. At that point, the blade popped the waste piece out from the workpiece. I used a slightly different method for the rest of the cut. First, I cut along the bottom curved line to the end where I made a 90-degree corner. Then I backed the blade up to the opening created before. From there, I cut along the upper curved line, which was parallel to the first long cut. I made the 90-degree corner, and that connected me to the previous cut, completing this long, narrow, curved shape. These next 2 interior cuts create accent marks on the largest pumpkin, and I'll show you how I get those sharp points on the bottom of the shapes. From the pilot hole, I cut down the line on one side until I reached the point. Then, rather than trying to make a ridiculously sharp turn, I backed the blade to the pilot hole, and then I cut along a second line until I reached the point once again. That caused the scrap piece to be pushed out by the blade, giving me plenty of maneuvering room to complete the other side of the shape. I completed the second shape in the same manner. The remainder of this layer consisted of making cuts that created accent marks on the pumpkins. The layer below this, which I already completed, will be painted black, so these cuts will allow that layer to show through. I won't show any more cutting on this layer because it consists of just one similar cut after another, and I've already demonstrated how to do the difficult parts. In case you're curious, it took me about an hour to cut this layer. The remaining layer to be cut is the top layer, which contains the words Happy Thanksgiving. If you're new to scroll sawing, you may find this layer to be the most challenging. The second layer contained many odd shapes, though cutting them had its challenges. They had one redeeming value. Many, probably most of those cuts, are intended to provide accents and add depth to the piece. However, if any of the cuts were slightly off, without the pattern in place to indicate where they were incorrect, no one's likely to notice anything wrong in the final piece. If a cut is slightly rounded, who will ever know it was supposed to be a sharp point? The current layer consists of letters spelling out two words, and accuracy is extremely important. Why? We all know what letters should look like, and if the cutting is off, the letters will appear off, which is something almost anyone can notice. I have several guidelines I do my best to adhere to in cutting letters. The first is that I always cut on the inside of the line, rather than right on the lines as I do for most patterns. I have two reasons for this. The first is that for letters like the A, there's only a small amount of material remaining in the little triangle at the top of the letter. Cutting on the line will minimize the amount of material left, and cutting on the outside of the line could cause a break. Then the top of the letter would have a missing part that jumps right out at you. Cutting on the outside of the line seems to me to be asking for trouble. The second reason for cutting on the inside of the lines is that, at times, the spacing between letters is small. Cutting on the inside of the lines ensures a more natural-looking spacing. If the letters are too close together, we may not know what is wrong, but our brains will be telling us that something is not right. The H will give you some practice cutting 90-degree corners since there are so many in this one letter. To me, it makes sense to start the cut on the left side, and I drilled the pilot hole in the middle of that side. I cut from the pilot hole to one of the lines, and I followed that down to the bottom. Now I needed to make a 90-degree turn to follow the line along the bottom. I cut all the way to the corner and then backed off the pressure on the blade so that it was running but no longer cutting. I used the curve the blade had just created, plus the waste area, to turn the workpiece 90 degrees. Once I was aligned to the next direction I wanted to cut, I put pressure on the blade again and made the short cut along the bottom. It was time to make another 90-degree turn, so I followed the same procedure. After I completed the left side of the H, I cut across the top of the crosspiece, and then I made a 90-degree turn using some same technique, of course, to start cutting the right side of the letter. The direction changes for the letter A aren't 90 degrees, but I make them in the same manner. As I mentioned earlier, you need to proceed with caution when making the cuts for the middle part of the letter. There's not much material left between the two angled sides, so I was careful to make the cuts inside the lines, leaving as much material as possible. When perfectly executed, there's only a small tab remaining that crosses part way between the sides. If you goof when cutting one of the A's, there still may be hope. This layer will be glued on top of another, so if the tab breaks, you can save the broken piece and glue it in place during the assembly stage of the project. It's unlikely that the break will be noticeable. I do have an overall suggestion for cutting all the letters, and that is to slow the blade speed if you have a variable speed saw. The blade is less aggressive at lower speeds and less likely to cut further than intended when approaching an intersection. There's no need for me to comment on cutting each letter, as I've already demonstrated the useful tips you need to know. I do, however, want to leave a word of caution, and that's to be extremely careful when cutting the two G's. As with the A, you have only a very small tab holding an important part of the letter's shape to the rest of the piece. I think I've run more G's than any other letter. I'm certain that I recorded the glue up for this item, but I can't find the file. I accidentally erased some video from my computer. That must have been one of the lost files. But you can figure out how to glue these three layers together without my help. As always, I would appreciate your comments on this project. I read and respond to every one. Until next time, suggestions for what to watch next are on the screen, along with the thought for the week.